And there should be a sign-in sheet, perfect, going around the table. Thank you all for coming this morning. We really appreciate it. I want to kick us off with a welcome. We have 2 additional executives with us this morning. Board President for Lot, Cynthia Pratt, and also Thurston County Commissioner, Commissioner Hutchins. So thank you both for joining. We appreciate your time and participation, and I think it's also going to be fun. Okay. This is our 3rd executive work group meeting in phase 2 for our EIS. We did have 2 in October, kind of to kick us off and really focus on some key elements of outreach and also the scoping period. So today what we want to do is, as you've seen on the agenda, walk through the major themes and provide a pretty detailed overview of the scoping comments, and Carmen and Tessa are going to do that today, and also make that connection of how the themes and comments we heard are influencing our expectations for the scope of the EIS, which we are currently working on as well. We also want to talk about the scoping report, provide an update on the community sounding board. We also want to provide an update on our coordination with agencies. We've had a number of meetings and phone calls that have been really fruitful and productive. And then lastly from there, we are going to touch on engagement opportunities for 2019. We will talk about our next executive work group meeting, and then we'll close out with the reoccurring agenda items that we will always hold. And that's one, an opportunity for roundtable feedback on the process, on the meetings, participation, kind of open forum, and then also an opportunity for the public that's with us today to comment. And for that, I just want to note that we also have forms that Ray has right here that are observer comment forms. So you're welcome to stand up and share your comments or input, or if you'd prefer to write it down, that form provides some guidance, and on the back has a area for written comment as well. Any questions before we kind of jump into it this morning? All right. Okay, so like I had mentioned briefly, Carmen and Tessa are going to walk through the comments that were received in the submissions during scoping. And the format that we're going to do that today using PowerPoint slides is really the template of how we will review information in the EIS with you moving forward, both formal and informal. And I'll talk about that a little bit more as well. But this really is a great opportunity to get feedback, input, and answer questions. So please feel free to jump in. We want to find that balance of providing an overview, as there were over 900 individual comments in total, so we're not going to go through every single one, but also give you enough detail so you have a sense of what we heard from stakeholders in the communities, and we will take any feedback we receive from you today, as well as what we heard on Thursday from the technical and funding and governance work groups and the scoping comments, all into consideration as we figure out and define the scope of the EIS and where is the best opportunities and places to put the resources within the budget we have for the EIS. So with that, I think you guys can launch into it.
Yeah, let's get started. Jesse, do you want to cover the first slide and then we'll take it over?
What we also wanted to touch on today, what you'll see here are the discipline-specific expertise that will be part of the EIS process. So our other teaming partners that you'll see, Floyd Snyder and ESA are really us with people behind us, so you're kind of familiar. But Enviro Issues, that's Ray Outlaw, who you've also met many times and is supporting us for public outreach. And then you'll see Moffitt, Nickel, Herrera, Ramble, and Heffron are also some key technical expertise that will be doing components of the EIS. These are our primary discipline leads. We have a number of other team members that we'll introduce you to as our EIS technical work advances.
Alrighty, so as Jesse mentioned, we'll kick this off and really focus on the disciplines, the elements of the environment, so you can get a full understanding of what we heard for each of those topics. You'll see the slides set up that way. Carmen, do you want to give us the overview first?
Yeah, so first, just a quick overview. We had a really successful scoping comment period. We received over 270 comment submissions from individuals, organizations, agencies, and tribes. We spent time bracketing those comment submissions so we could identify the key or categorize them by element of the environment and issue. And in so doing, we got to that over 900 individual comments on a variety of issues. And this helped us, or is helping us, identify the scope of analysis and the elements of the environment to address in the draft EIS. So yeah, I'm going to present the major themes through each element of the environment. And I should mention, we've not made judgment on these. In other words, we haven't validated all these comments. We simply wanted to present the range of comments we received on these major issues. So first one up is water resources, and next to biological resources, we received the most number of comments on water. Most often we heard there should be a robust analysis of water quality in Capitol Lake and Butt Inlet. 3 aspects of water quality were emphasized: sources of problems, potential for water quality improvements, compliance with water quality criteria, including how the alternatives would address the upcoming waste load allocations for the Butt Inlet TMDL. There were differing viewpoints on the magnitude and extent of problems, the causes, and potential approaches to analysis. Many said the lake is the main contributor to low dissolved oxygen in Butt Inlet, and that the EIS evaluation of impacts should place a high priority on implementation of those waste load allocations for the lake. Others said water quality in the lake is better than portrayed. Several provided critiques of state water quality studies and data and requested additional sampling to establish a current baseline. We were also provided some suggestions for modeling tools for the analysis. Back to there. Including some tools that Ecology has been using for the TMDL.
Alrighty, so we took this all in, and when we're thinking about the potential scope of analysis for the draft environmental impact statement, of course we'll start with a review and compilation of existing data, and that ranges from Ecology's comprehensive data set from Butt Inlet. We also understand that Thurston County has good data. We'll take a look at that against the best available science that's available. And we also understand that there's been a request for and potential value from additional water quality sampling. So we anticipate collection of additional focused water quality samples from Capitol Lake and during storm events. And that'll help us to evaluate potential and develop a baseline for water quality within Capitol Lake, and then we'll use that ecology data where appropriate for evaluation of water quality under an estuary alternative. And then finally, I would say we have had some comments about potential impacts to water quality from upstream, and upper watershed water quality may be evaluated to the extent that it would help us understand existing conditions or potential future impacts. That's our general approach, and having now gone through an element of the environment, I think we should say if there's something that you're not seeing reflected or you have a question about the comments that we're representing to you, please feel free to ask, or if there's something that you wanted us to consider as we describe our general approach that we're formulating, let us know.
So I heard you say sampling in Capitol Lake, but what about Butt Inlet?
Yeah.
Right now, the plan is to collect additional, or the thinking is to collect additional samples in Capitol Lake. We understand that Ecology really has such a robust data set from Butt Inlet, and we've worked with them to understand would they collect additional samples if is that their recommendation, and we're taking their input there as part of our decision-making process. That's the plan right now.
It seems to me that that's been one of the consistent critical complaints from the Clipper folks, is the the data was only for I don't remember, for a certain period of time.
Right.
It wasn't for the entire year. And so some additional, at least DO sampling, seemed would make sense in the inlet itself. The data is also getting pretty old now, so I think that will become an issue if it's not addressed in some fashion.
Okay.
Well, and I think we'll get to this later in the agenda today too. We did have an agency coordination meeting with ecology on various topics that have a nexus to the EIS, and water quality was at the top of the list. And one of the questions we put to them was if they felt that they had data gaps, and they didn't feel that they really did. But we also agree that water quality is one of the technical areas where there's the greatest range of opinions, and that the data, particularly in Capitol Lake, is getting quite old or dated. So we felt that was an appropriate place to put the resources in water quality sampling across seasons, not just a one-shot event in the Capitol Lake. But our understanding is that the stations in Bud Inlet do have a little bit more recent data. So we are evaluating, like Tessa said, we're working on the scope of the EIS, and we're trying to be mindful of allocation of resources within our budget constraints too. So we agree that it makes sense to focus in and have current baseline water quality data. The question of scope is we're still kind of figuring out.
Is there ongoing monitoring being done in the inlet at all at this point? Do you know?
I don't know the answer to that question.
We'd have to check with ecology on what their most recent Bud Inlet data was.
I know that lot for does effluent monitoring, but I don't believe they do any ambient water quality monitoring.
Exactly.
And I don't know about the city or the county what they do, or report for that matter.
We'll investigate that. And Mayor Komet, when you were, suggesting the potential additional sampling, you saw us all taking notes, and that's a perfect example of what we're hoping to hear and what this conversation might be like, because we are still defining the scope of the EIS.
So kind of following up on that, Capitol Lake is not a finite kind of box there. It's upstream as well as downstream, and I know for a fact that Lot would be affected by some of the decisions if you don't take into consideration the whole scope of the water quality as it moves through and down into the inlet. So I'm hoping that kind of focus gets addressed as well.
Yeah, absolutely. That's definitely something from all work groups and the community and stakeholders is what we have heard is the importance of recognizing how interconnected all of the watershed is and the lake basins to Bud Inlet. So that's something that crosses all technical analysis, is making sure that we're looking holistically at the system.
And one thing that we'll do unique to each discipline, or as is appropriate, is define the scope of the analysis. So water quality, as you just mentioned, is affected from upstream resources and impacts downstream resources. And so that scope might be a bit bigger, whereas something like visual quality might have a slightly smaller scope in terms of scale. And as we get into the EIS, we'll put definition around that.
I just have a clarification on, you might have explained what GEMS is, but what's the acronym stand for?
Oh boy,
I might
access my memory
I might
banks here. Do you have that?
Okay,
handy? It's a tool.
Makes me feel better if you can.
It's a tool.
It's their model.
It's ecology's modeling tool.
So that they use one element of that model, so GEMS can cover various
Generalized
disciplines.
environmental modeling system for surface waters.
Thank you.
Nice, yeah.
That's
Wait
great.
for
And
Sita.
I concur with the previous comments from Cynthia.
I want to follow up on Pete's suggestion that we have data from Bud Inlet at the same time as data from Capitol Lake. I think it's going to be important for people who, whatever their perspectives are, whether they're pro-lake or pro-estuary, One of the things that affects dissolved oxygen, of course, is temperature. And so if we're comparing month by month, but in different years, it may not be comparable, depending on the temperature and depending on hydrological events. So if some other agency, ecology or the port, is taking samples at the same time that Capitol Lake is, that will be useful. And if they're not, we should consider it.
That makes sense. Thank you. Commissioner Ritchie?
I just want to add my comment, and that is, again, following up on what Cynthia and Pete have said, and even Carmen, looking at this whole thing holistically, is that I think it would be a huge gap if we didn't consider upriver, way upstream as to what's coming in, as well as out in the sound. And I know it's going to be more expensive to do something like that, but I think it's like you're trying to research what came first, the chicken or the egg. You got to consider the rooster somewhere in there, in that equation.
Well, you'd better ask.
Can we quote you?
I like that.
I prefer not, in case I'm wrong on the rooster chicken thing.
You better ask the legend, the governor, to fully fund the
I realize that, yeah.
EIS.
It's a huge gap.
Thank you. This is helpful.
Shall we move forward? Great.
Yes, lots of interest in sediment transport and geomorphology issues. Many said this is the key element of the EIS. So comments generally requested that the EIS address how much sediment is settling in the Capitol Lake Basin, to where it would go in an open system, and the downstream impacts in Bud Inlet. We were reminded that the EIS is required to consider sediment transport and depositional locations within Lower Bud Inlet as the authorizing budget proviso. Some requested that we consider appropriate baseline measures and to update sediment data from previous studies. Comments frequently stated that sediment management is key to successfully moving forward. These requested that the EIS describe initial and long-term maintenance dredging and other sediment management techniques that could be used for the various alternatives. A large focus of the comments was about sediment transport under an open system and potential impacts within Bud Inlet, including the port, federal navigation channel, waterfront businesses, marinas. That last bullet for when we talk about sediment quality.
Okay. So for sediment transport, we'll start with our existing bathymetric data. We do have it from several years past, and we'll look at trends, how sediment has moved within the system. And then because this is, really such an important topic, we anticipate numerical modeling for hydrodynamics and sediment transport to understand how and where sediment is going. And the evaluation of trends will also help us to take a look at the output from that numerical modeling and what that looks like in terms of on the ground. Once we understand how much and where it's going and how it's been settling historically, we'll work with the team to develop initial and ongoing plans for maintenance dredging. And that'll include plans for potential disposal of that material and mitigation to avoid and minimize impacts from sediment transport.
This is nitpicking, so I apologize before I even say this, but on the third bullet point, can we change the word will to can?
Oh, good. Yes.
Well, and these are scoping comments.
Right.
So
Oh, I see.
they're
Okay.
what people have put forward, but
Okay, I got
we've
it.
kind of paraphrased it down. So
Okay.
right now it's just the input received.
Okay, I withdraw.
Regarding these comments, you opened up with that these have not been validated. Is that something that you will validate or invalidate?
That's a good question.
Yeah, that's a really good question. For sure, when we kick off the draft EIS process with our subject matter experts, our discipline leads, they're gonna be going through these comments with us, and they're in the best position to kind of sort out the comments and consider them against best available science that kind of thing. So, we're just in the early stage. We're just, basically summarizing what we've heard, but we haven't had the time or taken the time yet to validate it.
And that will come back to the committee then, or the work group, whether they can validate it or not?
Well, what we'll do is, right now, all of our teaming partners that are some of the folks you saw with the discipline-specific expertise, they have received all the scoping comments so that they understand what input was received to help them develop the scope of the technical analysis to be performed. So the software that has been used, we were able to categorize, like Carmen mentioned, all of the comments so we can batch out and identify everything. What moves forward and what we really come back to you, and we'll touch on this a little bit when we talk about the April meeting, we will come back to this group as well as the other work groups and talk about measurable evaluation criteria to evaluate the alternatives, and then also methodologies or the approach for components of the EIS. And that's, I think, really where we get to come back and say, given all that we've heard, given our expertise, existing studies, here's how it all comes together and how we think we move forward. So there isn't a per se matrix that says, here's scoping comments and here's validation.
Okay.
If that helps.
Yeah, it does, thank you.
Jeff?
I didn't hear you say, and so I want to check this. I didn't hear you say a discussion of sediment deposition management. I heard you talk about dredging scenarios, but I also heard it characterized, as an open system. Whereas I would think that for instance, the size and shape of an opening can influence deposition. The introduction of, for example, baffles can influence deposition. And it seems to me that those kind of considerations should be integral to evaluation of sediment management going forward. So I wanted to make sure you're going to be drilling down to that level.
Either one, you want to?
Great comment.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yes, I would say that right now, and we're still refining the scope, right now the numerical modeling will have to have parameters around the size of the opening, and that'll influence how the sediment moves through the system. Additionally, we've discussed with the modeler do we run evaluations with sediment control structures, as you mentioned, and how does that influence where it goes? For example, if there's one just downstream of the opening, does that move sediment over to West Bay? And so we've had those discussions. We anticipate that will be part of the model run, and that's a good point of clarification.
And I think the other point to make, just as context in the back of your mind as we're going through this, at the kind of underlying all of the team's evaluation of what the scope of the EIS is, we always tie back or harken back to what helps us evaluate alternatives, what helps us compare the influence or impact of alternatives. So there are times where we might say, gosh, the scientist or the engineer in us would love to do this type of study, but at the end of the day, we have to focus back to what helps us evaluate and compare alternatives to support the EIS. So that kind of is at the foundation of everything. So to your point, that's exactly spot on. The work of sediment transport modeling, hydrodynamics, needs to assess the changes and differences of the alternatives so we can compare.
So one thing I haven't seen mentioned in here is the concept of managing the sediment better within the river system. It was something that occurred to me, and you see it reflected in the city's comments, that there's already under the first phase of the TMDL identification of major erosion, bank erosion locations within the river, at least within the river. And part of the plan is to try and stabilize those. In addition to that, I mean, historically, parts of the river have been subjected to significant log jams that have completely changed the channel location, resulting in a huge sediment load during that adjustment. So it just seems to me that part of the plan needs to look at how do you manage the sediment before it ever gets into the lake or into the lower bud inlet. It doesn't mean that we're going to be able to stop natural processes from occurring, obviously. But it's already addressed in the TMDL. I don't see this as an additional workload. It's simply just incorporating the results of that TMDL work into one of the alternatives of the EIS. So,
Got it.
So this brings us back to the connections between the upper Deschutes and the lower Deschutes that Commissioner Hutchings also brought up. And I understand that it's potentially challenging to evaluate those connections without full funding for the EIS, but Mayor Komet's comments highlight again the importance of evaluating the connections and the impacts of the upper Deschutes dynamics as far as possible. I also wanted to, you may be going to mention this with sediment quality. You said you're going to talk about that.
Yes, we have slides on that too, but
Yeah.
please, share thoughts now and we'll get to it as well.
You know that one of my questions is about not just potential impacts, but potential benefits of sediment. We have contaminated sediment due to legacy activities at the port, and is it possible that cleaner sediment will cap that contamination and provide environmental benefits?
Well, it's kind of a spoiler alert now for the slide ahead. But we'll cover, but I want to answer you now and then we'll get there too. We'll cover the comments received that tie to sediment quality. It is one of the areas that we also think it's appropriate to fill a data gap and get recent data around the sediment quality within the lake basins. The data there is getting older, similar to water quality. The last sediment sampling event within the lake basins was 2007, which is kind of quite a while ago now. So we anticipate in the EIS scope to include sediment sampling within the lake basins so that we will understand when sediment moves, what really does that mean relative to the bud inlet concentrations. We're kind of fortunate timing-wise that it was in 2018 Ecology released the South Puget Sound Regional Background Study, where they reviewed and kind of compiled sediment data within the inlets, West Bay, East Bay, and out in Bud Inlet. We also we'll discuss in our agency coordination meetings, have been able to connect with the ports team and their environmental director and really understand kind of where the port is at with their cleanup process and as well. And we'll be working with them to share data and receive some of the data they have in Bud Inlet so that we can answer some of those questions. But this was a place that we also thought it made sense to refresh and get baseline data. It's a good question, particularly relative to not just the port, but West Bay. There's different concepts out there for sediments, natural recovery or remediation. So,
All right, onward.
Yeah, aquatic invasives. So we frequently heard that the EIS should evaluate how invasives would be managed and controlled under each alternative. Comments were primarily on the New Zealand mud snail. Both supporters of a managed lake and supporters of an open system, estuary or hybrid, spoke to the New Zealand mud snail issue. Supporters of an open system stated that such a system would help address them and other invasive species by introducing salt water back into the system. Supporters of a managed lake felt that it's more of a management issue and not a reason to close the lake, and they provided various studies and cited reports to support their comment. Yeah.
Okay, so for aquatic invasive species, I'm going to start sounding like a broken record, but we'll conduct a review of the existing available information. For example, the 5-mile surveys for the New Zealand mud snail and some of the verifications about aquatic invasive species in the system to date. From there, our goal will be to understand how that changes under each alternative. And so, for example, with an open alternative, we'll evaluate literature regarding potential control opportunities and effectiveness of different control opportunities for managing the aquatic invasive species, for example, the New Zealand mud snail. And we may look at evaluate how salinity affects the New Zealand mud snail. That's something that is under discussion, and we've had an early coordination meeting with WDFW about. That's generally the approach related to aquatic invasives.
When you say you may do it if DFW says it can be impacted one way or the other, then you would include it, or is it up in the air whether you're going to do, the way you stated it, it wasn't quite clear what the cutoff is to include it or not include it.
About salinity and the effectiveness. That is just something that we're still evaluating, whether we would work with them in that capacity and how that would be integrated into our analysis. So that's something that we're just in discussions about right now, and we want to let the executive work group know.
I presume there will be a list of invasive species and equal attention provided to most, if not all of them. I don't want us to get all high-centered on
The snail.
New Zealand mud snails when there are other species that are critical
Yes.
to the system.
That's a good point. Yeah, I mean, obviously, most of the comments were on the mud snail, which is why it dominates the list there. But yeah, like Tessa said, you'd be evaluating all of them.
Well, and just as much as you folks are well aware, as much as we've talked about the geographic footprint and the water connectivity, all of these topics are all connected. So we also are mindful of a range of invasive species and what that means to and how it impacts sediment disposal once it's dredged. Because that's not just about the snail, that's also about chemical quality, it's also about purple loosestrife. So you're right, all of these things are interconnected as well. And we're going to keep going, and I think this is such the key topic. A few other things we can be. I can be brief when we give you updates so that we can put good energy here, because there's a number of things that this is so helpful. We want to make sure that you have a sense of where we're at.
Definitely. Let's do the next two slides.
A large number of comments on fish and wildlife covering a variety of issues. Comments requested that we evaluate the benefits and impacts to salmon in the basin and the watershed. Related to this, it was requested that the EIS should consider the habitat restoration potential of each alternative. We also heard that the EIS should evaluate potential effects on southern resident orcas, including the relationship of the alternatives to the goals of the governor's task force. We heard that the EIS should evaluate impacts to bat populations. Here, the comments were focused on a couple key questions, such as, what would happen to the bat populations in an open system, and is there any viable mitigation to address those impacts? Finally, we were asked about, or asked to address changes to populations of waterfowl, to mammals, sensitive species. We were also asked to look at the viability of shellfish harvest under an open system. Yeah, and here again, a number of commenters submitted various reports requesting that the EIS team review and consider those for the analysis. Wetlands and vegetation, we didn't receive as many comments, just a handful really. Most of these asked that the EIS evaluate how alternatives would affect wetlands and shoreline habitat and trees surrounding the lake. A couple of them mentioned specific points around the basin, including freshwater forested wetlands at Tumwater Historical Park.
So the general approach here will be starting with an evaluation of existing conditions. So that's a look at what species are in the project area and habitat zone mapping, what is out there. And that could also include spatial mapping of regulated resources such as wetlands. And this will help us to establish a baseline so we can understand how these plant communities, for example, would change under the alternatives like an open system. When we do that, we'll be well set up to evaluate the impacts and benefits to the species that were listed on that earlier slide: salmonids, orcas, bats, birds. And potential mitigation measures to reduce or minimize those impacts.
So it seems like what's missing from that is, obviously if you change from a freshwater habitat to a saltwater habitat, you change the whole nature of the ecosystem there. There's the other side of that equation is how will it benefit the saltwater species as well? We seem to be focusing on what are the negative impacts on the freshwater species, but that's not a natural system necessarily. So it seems like both sides of that equation need to be looked at when this is.
Absolutely. As with a lot of the other elements of the environment, so much of this project is about the benefits and impacts, right? And we did get a lot of comments, it may not have been reflected there, about how does this change the ecosystem, the community of flora and fauna. So we're gonna be looking at holistically, how does this change the system? What does that mean in terms of shifting populations? So.
Okay.
The loss of bats may be due to loss of mosquitoes, and there may be good impacts from losing mosquitoes.
Good. There's plenty at my house that they want.
Keep us going.
Okay, sea level rise.
Yeah, so most of the comments here were pretty general, kind of high level, asking that the EIS consider the implications of sea level rise and climate change, and consider the resiliency of the alternatives under changing conditions in the future. Most frequently, we heard that the EIS should address impacts from sea level rise and potential for flooding during, high river flow events and king tides. Many recognize that the lake is a major focus of the city's attention on sea level rise, and requested that the EIS consider the city's joint plan with the port and law to address sea level rise in downtown and how the plans may be affected by the alternatives. We also got a few comments requesting that the EIS consider the ability of alternatives to sequester carbon and offset emissions.
As I mentioned, we will have numerical modeling with us as part of the analysis, and one thing that we'll do with that is we'll model water elevations under different sea level rise scenarios, and that'll really be how we evaluate potential resiliency of the alternatives under those different sea level rise scenarios. It'll also help us to identify potential impacts related to local and adjacent infrastructure. And our current thinking is that WSDOT standards related to how they look at sea level rise and under a SEPA analysis could be very helpful to guide our approach as well.
Is that over time because levels could increase or decrease?
That's right.
Not decrease, but
The rate of
different
increase
gradual.
is varying.
Yes.
Okay.
Correct.
Maybe this is a question for Mayor Selby, but Mayor, has the city done some studies already about sea level rise?
Yes, there's a big study that's just been put into draft form on our website, and it's a partnership with the port and LOT and the city to, they hired a consultant, very well-known consultant from, I think he's from the East Coast, and done modeling for all kinds of larger cities. And so it's pretty impressive document, so.
We have
Very
also,
impressive.
we'll give an update as part of our agency coordination meeting that we've been able to meet and talk about the sea level rise response plan with the city as well. And we'll kind of get into that, but you're exactly right. We're really trying to identify those agency projects or programs where their timeline is relative to the EIS and where they're at to make sure we're consistent with good work that's already done and we best leverage what
It's
has
a great way
already
to leverage what we're already doing.
Good.
Exactly, so.
Excellent.
Yeah, I would say that the report, and I think we're getting a briefing later this month.
Yep.
There's a meeting on the 30th
21st.
in the evening about that report. I don't know what level of detail we'll be talking about, but I'm pretty sure they've done detailed surveying of the elevations in this area and have looked at ways to mitigate for sea level rise, or protect the existing development from sea level rise in this area. So that work should already be done. It should simply be a matter of just plugging it into this.
There is modeling in the capital area.
Yeah, and that's the beauty that is really wonderful and such an advantage for us on this EIS are these work groups. So we get a pulse and some guidance from you guys. We also, from the technical work group, we have a door into each local government and agency and entity involved. And the folks on the technical work group have been wonderful over the last month. They have been a door, for example, just Matt Curtis at WDFW pulled together multiple people within his agency that could meet with us so that we could talk about all of the topics with the nexus under WDFW purview. So we have been doing that, and you're exactly right. We're really working to make sure we're consistent with those agency programs and projects, but also if there's existing studies and data, we want to leverage that. We don't want to reinvent the wheel, and we want to make sure that we can, have access to that and share information. So, yeah, we've done that quite a bit.
Is that on the 30th at
30th,
City?
5:30.
At City Hall?
I don't know where it is.
Where's it?
I don't know.
It's not on
It's not on my
this.
calendar.
This is a 2018, isn't it?
Oh, I have it at the port.
Yeah,
It's at the port.
Okay.
yeah.
I don't have my calendar.
Yep,
5:30.
5:30 on the 30th.
5 to 8:30?
5:30.
5:30?
5:30.
5:30 to 8:30.
5:30 to 7 is
The one thing I would say though is you look at that work, you'll see that the focus is more on the isthmus and the west or the east side of the lake. There was nothing in that report that addressed the Deschutes Parkway side, from what I could see.
That's right.
I don't know if that's been addressed in other documents or not. And of course, it doesn't extend to the south basin either. So I don't know if additional information is needed to be able to indicate that. I'll just leave it at that.
Thank you.
So, you mentioned that you are, and rightly so, you don't want to reinvent the wheel, and so you're utilizing other reports and stuff. My assumption, however, is that your experts that are reviewing these things will weigh the integrity of each report so that everyone can do a report. Sometimes they're good, sometimes they're not. So my assumption is you will balance that as well.
That's
Exactly.
exactly right. One of the phase one, and Tessa, jump in here too if you'd like. There were a number of outcomes of phase one that really our goal was to tee phase two in this EIS up, really be foundation. And besides the draft purpose and need statement that everyone collaborated on, one of the things that also was beneficial was the development and review of best available science.
Okay.
Really just reaching into the state code for definition of best available science, but we did review that as a group and agreed on what are the metrics that you measure the quality of science and peer review and whatnot. So you're exactly right that the technical discipline team members or experts kind of use that as a clearinghouse for all of the information that comes in as well.
Oh, good.
So they've got a list of all their studies they did in phase 1, and whether it was peer reviewed, whether it was best available science, strengths, weaknesses. So there's a nice summary of that in phase 1.
That's what happens when I'm two meetings late.
But you're spot on to the point.
So great minds think alike.
I think the great thing is that all the information is available on the website, so it's researchable.
So if you go to the phase 1 report, just go to page 100.
Okay.
You're like our Google. You're just pulling stuff up.
You have great material. I've taught your material.
Let's go. Yay. Okay, we'll keep going here because we do want to make sure that we can touch on traffic and other things that I think you guys will perk up and might have input for us on too.
Air quality.
Okay, yeah, so the majority of comments here describe potential odor under an open system as negative or inappropriate for an urban setting, detracting from a visitor experience. However, there were a few comments expressing appreciation for the natural odor of an estuary. So we were asked to evaluate potential odor impacts of an open system considering tidal elevations, wind conditions, hydrogen sulfide production. And we have our technical team member, Ramble, who's prepared to do just that. We were also asked to put it in the context of historic conditions. So we plan to address, how are things different in the past versus now in terms of odor. So maybe probably kind of a little bit of what you're talking about.
Yeah, that's right. That's exactly where we will start. I think it's important for this discipline specifically to not just establish baseline conditions, which we will, but also to understand what the historic conditions were. For example, waste discharge directly into the water body that has since changed and has therefore changed our odor conditions. So we'll look at historic conditions, existing conditions, and then evaluate potential odor under each alternative. And as Carmen mentioned, that could be, for example, hydrogen sulfide under an estuary alternative. Paired with that is an air quality analysis. So we'll want to look at greenhouse gas emissions under the construction scenarios. So evaluating what those emissions are and how those compare to other similar projects within the Puget Sound region.
So I guess here's one area where I'm not sure frankly, how much effort needs to be put in, particularly the sulfur, hydrogen sulfide stuff. I mean, we've had ample situations where the lake's been completely drained for a variety of reasons over the years. I don't remember a lot of odor issues as it relates to that. Certainly not comparable to what people have historically talked about with the raw sewage type odors. Obviously, the tide fluctuates within Lower Bud Inlet every day. And,
Right.
you don't have that kind of problem occurring. So, I mean, I understand it has to be addressed, but I'm not sure I would put a lot of work into this one.
That's great. Yeah, we'll consider that, and we certainly appreciate any time you think that there's an area where maybe less emphasis needs to be placed on in terms of the analysis and level of effort. We are totally open to hearing about that, of course. So.
Recreation and land use.
Yeah, so I'll go through the recreation comments first. Generally, we're asked to evaluate any increase, loss, or changes to recreational use of the water body under the alternatives. As with other elements, you can clearly see the differences are split in opinions about or values placed on different kinds of recreational opportunities, and also different perceptions about what attracts or detracts residents or visitors from wanting to visit the water body and to access the water body. A lot of value placed on trails around the lakes, a lot of comments on trails. Other things that were mentioned were the temporal aspect of recreational opportunities under the alternatives. think that was it for recreation. And for land use, generally, a lot of the comments were focused on, consistency with local land use plans and policies. The last two bullets get to have a connection with some of the economic impacts that we'll be addressing. And for land use, here we'll be describing those impacts to the extent they could potentially affect land use in the area, kind of in a more qualitative way than we would in the economic impact section.
I think that's a good summary of how we'll address land use. So for recreation, we'll start, of course, by characterizing existing recreational opportunities within the project area. And then Mayor Kmet, as you described with fish and wildlife and wetlands, there just really is a difference in terms of what opportunities are available under the different alternatives. And so we'll understand and evaluate how those recreational opportunities change. And then also we understand that there's an importance of the existing ability to use the water body for walking and trails, and we'll want to understand how each of the alternatives support that recreational opportunity.
Will that be limited to just the downtown recreational areas and not so much, you have to include East Bay, but like Boston Harbor or Zittles or other recreational activities just beyond the downtown or beyond the downtown area that may be positively or negatively impacted? Is that too broad of a scope?
You mean by sediment deposition or something?
No, how it would impact, for example, if the yacht club were to shut down, if that negatively impacted them, it would direct or push activities elsewhere in the county, or elsewhere in the county.
Yeah, we'd certainly take a look at that. That might be
That's a
a
bit
little more of a
broad.
land use issue, perhaps, maybe
Yeah.
recreation. And like Tessa was mentioning, one of the first things we'll be doing right off the bat when we start in on the draft EIS is identifying that study area or the geographic scope for each element. And there's a lot of thinking around that, trying to identify what that is. And we'll definitely make a note of that comment. It's a good thought, and it is possible it could be something broader than just the basin. But it's hard
Broader
to
than
say
East
at this
Bay and West
point.
Bay, yeah.
Mhm.
Well, there's definitely a nexus between recreation and economic development.
Absolutely, yeah.
That's what draws a lot of people downtown.
Yep.
Okay. Let's switch over to visual quality.
Yeah. So visual quality, these comments a lot of times were value or opinion expressions. Supporters of a managed lake generally describe the pleasing aesthetic of the lake. There was those that describe the pleasing aesthetic as it currently is, and those that describe the pleasing aesthetic in the past before water quality issues or algae issues. And then supporters of an open system generally said that mud flats under an open system would be beautiful or more natural in appearance. And on the flip side, the supporters of a managed lake said mud flats would be ugly. So we didn't get a lot of specific comments about how to do the visual quality analysis. There were a couple that mentioned some important viewpoints, but even though we didn't get a lot of specific comments in this area, we know that providing visual simulations of the alternatives will be really important to support the analysis and to show the community what these things could look like. So,
And that's what we'll do.
yeah.
So we'll put together visualizations for each of the alternatives from vantage points around the water body, and that'll help us to evaluate, how things change and to show the community what that might look like.
Because having an open system would be much more dynamic over the years as far as how it develops, right? Because I look at Nisqually and it looks vastly different now than it did even 5 years ago. So would you be doing scenarios over certain time frames for people that it might not look really what people think is attractive for maybe 10 years? So things kind of fill in and grow in and
Yeah, we'll have to look at that. Obviously, we'd love to do a whole bunch of simulations, but we'll have to, figure out how to limit it to a reasonable number. Certainly, I could see us describing how that would change over time. Probably we would show a simulation after vegetation has grown up and it's
Yeah,
developed
right
a
after
little bit.
construction and then established, often it's.
Maybe,
Sure.
yeah,
Whatever.
yeah.
That's what I'm saying, thanks.
So, well, I think one of the things I would encourage you to think about is in the past, the way this has been presented is, do you want a lake, shows a picture of an open water body, or, managed wetland, shows a picture of a wetland, or an estuary that shows a picture of a mud flat. When in fact, an estuary is not a mud flat, it's only a mud flat. part of the
Tidal
pond.
elevations
Right.
matter.
And so I think, some perspective on how that looks as the water level varies over time is,
And as sea rise varies.
yeah. So anyway,
That's a great comment, and we are certainly anticipating that we would look at, high and low tides and how does that change the visual landscape, and then trying to provide context-specific visualizations or renderings of what it would be, not just what does standard mudflat look like.
and I think that the timing of the tides too is an issue that some issues as well. So.
All right, let's switch over to economics.
Economics. So yeah, I think we had almost 100 individual comments on economics. And the comments generally requested that the EIS address the beneficial and adverse, direct and indirect economic impacts of each alternative. Several pointed out that the EIS is required to consider an expanded area around Capitol Lake and Bud Inlet, including the port for the economic analysis.
Is that true?
I believe.
For the proviso, the appropriation is written to make sure that it's inclusive of economic analysis and that broader impact with sediment and economics, yes. That's right.
Some comments refer generally to how the project would affect local and regional economies, but majority of comments were focused on downstream parties and the impacts to them. So this included requests to analyze potential impacts to the port, its marine terminal operations, and waterfront businesses and marinas. Other comments requested the EIS consider cost to lot if no action or inadequate action is taken to address the waste load allocations, including cost to lot and its ratepayers should additional nutrient requirements be needed at the plant. Several requested an evaluation of ecosystem services, and we also heard that we should address benefits and impacts related to tourism.
Which can get to your
Yeah, with some emphasizing the economic benefits of a managed lake and others of an open system. So a lot of varied opinions.
For economics, we are workshopping this with our funding and governance as we want to ensure that our analysis supports their work. And so what are those opportunities to do that while still focusing in on the buckets that we heard from scoping comments. And so we kind of have really found 4 buckets out of those scoping comments, and that is, as Carmen mentioned, potential impacts to downstream resources, the potential ecosystem service values, tourism, and then the last one that we will certainly include in the EIS is planning level costs for each of the alternatives, and of course that'll be fundamental to the work that's done by funding and governance.
Can you explain what an ecosystem service value is?
Sure, so that is, or Mayor Clement has done this well, but that is a value that an ecosystem can provide that is not otherwise monetized. So for example, under an estuary alternative, the water quality benefits that would be provided above and beyond, for example, the existing lake system that could provide direct monetary benefits to lot. They would have a different or reduced treatment, and we can generally quantify that if we look at it in that way. So that's sort of one track for ecosystem service values, and another one is general personal value that can be placed on something like a natural system to keep with the estuary alternative there.
So, if the Capitol Lake is, if that alternative is chosen, what ends up happening, we would end up having to probably address more TMDL impacts, which means that it would cost our ratepayers horrendously more.
That's right.
And that needs to make sure that that gets addressed, I think.
That's right, and that's what Tessa was speaking to, that other economic analysis have done as well, is they look at, it's almost that opportunity cost. If this doesn't happen, what is the equivalent cost that has to happen in water treatment to achieve that same goal?
Yeah.
And I'm just mindful of our time, we're gonna keep going here.
Okay, we'll cruise through these.
All right, I'll go through this pretty quick.
Do you want to do the next two together?
Sure, yeah. Two main areas of comment for historic and cultural resources. Those that address kind of the historic resources and setting, and those that addressed traditional cultural properties, cultural values, cultural traditions. So along in the first bucket, we heard that the EIS should consider the design principles of the Capitol campus. So including the Wilder and White plan and the Olmsted landscape plan. Also, we were asked to consider historic designations and significance of the design of the campus and the lake's relationship to that. Others stressed cultural heritage that predates the landscape architecture, requesting that cultural properties, landscapes, and traditions be considered. Tribal resources, there were several comments requesting that the EIS consider how alternatives would affect tribal resources, including usual and accustomed areas. We also heard that folks wanted the EIS to address impacts of the dam and the basin on tribal treaty rights.
So we will look at tribal use of the project area and the impacts to usual and accustomed stations and grounds. For cultural and historic resources, we want to understand the built-in archaeological resources that are within the project area and how those would potentially be impacted under each alternative. And then we're committed to exploring the history of Capitol Lake. Is it truly an expression of what was included in the Wilder and White Homestead plans, and how does that influence the potential historic significance of the water body? That'll be key to take a look at. Okay. Sediment quality. Maybe we can do the next two together as well.
Yeah. So many comments about sediment contamination and how that may complicate sediment management under the alternatives. We were asked to include updated sediment quality data. This is something that Tessa was talking about earlier, or Jesse, I can't remember, to establish a baseline characterization of sediment within the water body. We were asked to define the relationship of the alternatives to the ongoing bed inlet sediment investigation and cleanup plan. And there were, various takes on the issue of where contaminated sediment would move in an open system, and questions about sediment deposition and bed inlet that could complicate cleanup there. Environmental health, just a few comments here, mostly related to sediment contamination and how that would potentially have environmental health impacts. A variety of other issues, including potential health consequences of algae in the system. There were some comments about potential for mud flats under an open system to create dangerous conditions, and a few other issues, mosquitoes, I think, yeah.
Jesse, do you want to touch on anything else related to sediment quality?
No, I think that covers it. I mean, really, there's various viewpoints, like many of these topics or disciplines, where some folks are concerned contamination could move into the project area, or the sediment in Capitol Lake is clean and provides added value for deposition in bed inlet, or it's impacted and provides concern for transport of sediment. Really, that's why we can see value in getting current baseline data to really understand our current conditions. So there's a various range of
Let's do the next two together as well.
Sure.
And then we'll be done.
Move closer right. I'm trying to see that. Oh. Transportation, we just had a handful of comments here, generally asking us to evaluate potential surface transportation impacts, both construction and operational impacts. Also to look at construction and operational impacts to marine transportation, and this would include impacts to the Federal Navigation Channel. And then kind of infrastructure impacts, so any folks were curious if any changes would be needed to Fifth Avenue Bridge, 4th Avenue, Deschutes Parkway, to fortify from tidal action under an open system. And there were a couple comments asking about if there would be any changes to the railroad trestle, separating the north and middle basins. Public services and utilities, generally these related to impacts to lot. Should not enough action be taken to address the TMDL waste load allocation, so their ability to renew their discharge permit with ecology, potential impacts to ratepayers, and then finally just a few comments related to impacts to utilities, specifically City of Olympia utilities and stormwater system.
Related to transportation, we'll start with characterizing existing conditions and working with the city. They've been great about being helpful in providing that data, whether it's that characterization or trip counts, and we'll want to understand how those facilities are used within the project area, not just extending from, for example, 4th and 5th Avenue bridges, but parking lots that support the various recreational alternatives. So that's one of those areas where the disciplines influence each other. From there, we'll look at what are the potential impacts of construction. So construction-related truck trips is important. How does transportation change during construction? And then finally, what are the transitions for the transportation facilities, long-term changes related to each of the alternatives? And for public services and utilities, it'll be that evaluation of potential impacts to wastewater and stormwater, as Carmen described.
So, just a thought on this. Keep in mind that the South Basin, you have outfalls from I-5. There's a city wastewater lift station on the southwest corner of the South Basin. I don't know what kind of utility lines pass underneath that part of the lake.
Is that near Marathon Park?
No, this would be further south.
Further south.
Near the, certainly there's a lift station at Marathon Park as well, or just on the west side of the Deschutes Parkway. That's a lot. That's a major lot pumping facility.
Yeah.
But I'm talking, there's a city lift station near the old brew house in that area. I think it's far enough inland, it's probably not going to be impacted one way or the other. But
Then that's in Tumwater, your lift
it's
station?
in Tumwater, yeah, it's a Tumwater lift station. Again, I don't know what kind of other utilities are in that historical park area, but you'll just want to make sure you don't ignore that.
I'm not sure, but potentially, and I might have forgotten, but the one in Tumwater, I think there is a major line that ends up going down to the valley, Tumwater Valley.
Tumwater Valley Golf Course?
I think so. I could be wrong, but I think it starts
Yeah,
there
that
and
would
then
be-
moves over down the road and into that, so it could be impacted.
I think that once you get above the falls, that's not an issue. I think there's all kinds of utilities obviously there.
Yeah.
I'm more concerned about around the historical park area.
Right.
That's where, I mean, there was a sewer line rerouted that used to run down the railroad tracks. And anyway, it gets complicated. One of our utility staff could explain to you how that works in that area. Just in general, I think, don't forget the South Basin has some utilities as well that should be considered. Something.
I think that gets us into the scoping report. So just briefly, we also met with the technical work group and the funding and governance work groups on Thursday. We were able to review the scoping themes with them as well. With the technical work group, we were at this level of detail. We were a little more brief with funding and governance, kind of focusing and honing in more on the economics. But we're able to get a little bit of feedback from those folks on the scope items and some analysis. The technical work group staff, I think some of them had looked at the comments, and we also have been connecting with them. But we also asked the same questions. Is there anything missing? What's your first thoughts and reactions? Do you know of existing data? So where we're at now, like we said, is we're completing preparation of the scoping report. In addition to appendices with every comment received, like they are available on the project website on the library page. You can have a full PDF of everything or by individual that submitted comments. The scoping report will have all of that in the appendix. It will have these topic discipline themes to make it, a little bit like a Cliff Notes version for a reviewer. But in addition, it'll also have a description of the primary alternatives and additional alternatives that have come forward during scoping. So that's where folks can also see an understanding and description of DELI or temporal hybrids or things of that nature, or CLIPA's proposal as well, so that's captured there for the reviewer. We're on track to complete the scoping report and have that out for issuance in February. Which sounded so far away in December, but here we are. So that will be coming out to everyone as well. As we've kind of been a broken record to some extent the last couple months, scoping is really when we are eyes open, ears open, taking everything in. And part of that is really, one of the items was enterprise services. Our team really took the opportunity afforded to us under scoping and received feedback, particularly with this group, around our project name and logo as well. And we really listened to that input and determined that refinement of the project name seemed warranted or needed to make sure that the name and logo reflect the project area in its current condition and also past condition. So the new or refined name and logo is now, do you mind clicking?
Yep.
The Capitol Lake Deschutes Estuary Long-Term Management Project Environmental Impact Statement. It's still a mouthful. We didn't make it really any shorter. Maybe we deleted one word. Everything under the orange line stays. What has changed is we previously had Lower Deschutes Watershed. Now that is Deschutes Estuary. We had substantive discussion and feedback from this group as well. Lower Deschutes Watershed was a outcome of our discussions in phase 1, but revisiting it, receiving comments during scoping, questioning really the clarity of what that meant. So what you'll see now is the refined name and logo. You'll also see a stillhead trout has been added to the logo. We did have a question from a technical work group person about where's the snail. It would be giant at this scale if we were to show it. But this is the appropriate time for us to make this refinement. It will come out as part of the scoping report. That's really when we are, communicating out everything that came in during scoping. And so the scoping report will reflect the refined name and logo. The important thing we want to make sure that we communicate along with this update is that the refined name does not indicate any change in the scope or analysis to be performed in the EIS. We are still looking at those primary alternatives plus what's come forward in through the scoping process. So any questions briefly before I move on to another update? All right, and I'm talking a little faster than I normally do, being mindful of time because we spent a little longer on scoping comments, which was valuable time. What I want to do now is ask Ray to join us up here. Ray is going to overview, we use slides again, to provide an update on the community sounding board. This is something that we brought to you in late October as part of our process map, and we're prepared to move forward with it. So thank you, Ray.
Yeah, thank you. Good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
So we just have a few slides to talk through quickly what the sounding board looks like as it sort of comes into shape here heading into the new year. Excuse me, you probably, most of you remember we're here, we talked a little bit about this at the last meeting. The idea is just to bring a group of interested stakeholders to the table. Yeah, thank you. So a diverse group of stakeholders to the table that otherwise would essentially be on the sidelines between now and when the draft EIS is released, a year and a half or so from now. This is a little bit unusual for an EIS process at the state level. It's more common at the federal level to have these kind of additional engagement. But given the really intense interest by the community, this feels like a really important part to make sure the community can stay involved as this project moves forward and have some sense of what's going on over time. So we're looking for a group of diverse, engaged stakeholders. We want people that can provide, collective input. We are not going to ask the group for consensus. We're not asking them for a vote. We're not asking them for specific recommendations. Sounding board is an appropriate name to provide well-asked questions and get some feedback. We'll share those outcomes, that feedback with enterprise services, with this group, with the other work groups. And again, we're not asking them to make decisions, but to help provide feedback as enterprise services and the project team move forward with the project. So I won't read these, but it's important that the group have a very specific goal. And the goal is for enterprise services to work directly with the CSB to make sure they understand the process as it moves along and that we're collecting feedback that can be useful. And there's also a promise involved from enterprise services to make sure that everyone understands that enterprise services is committed to working with this group and making it a valuable use of their time as well as a valuable use of the project team's time. So we have identified some candidate criteria. These are not necessarily you have to check every box or any one individual box, but we wanted to wrap our heads around what does an ideal candidate look like so we can make some smart decisions about who to involve in this process. So we want folks that are potentially affected by the project, so people that live in the community, tribal members. We don't want agency or elected officials. We have 3 bodies already for those type of participants, so we're looking for people with a different perspective. Also not a member of one of the 3 work groups. We also want to try to spread this out as much as possible, so we're looking for 1 representative from any given local community group, for example, so that we don't have 5 from the same group and only 2 from a different perspective. Again, we want individuals that contribute to a diversity of interest. This ties back to the previous point. We want to make sure we can have a conversation and a dialogue with lots of different perspectives and interests at the table rather than one interest that carries the day, so to speak. Demographic diversity, we talked about this a bit in both of the previous meetings. Youth would be ideal, so we're going to try our best to target some college age participants, for example. Someone at the technical meeting suggested teachers might be a really good resource, so we're really going to think about and try to target a diverse group. Again, we want the broadest perspective as possible.
We've also heard, and I think even you folks have during opportunities for the public to comment during the work groups, just the importance and recognition that there's a long legs to the preferred alternative and maintenance, and having the youth be involved as they will be the ones that will be living with the outcome. So
Young families too, because they have a perspective of recreation and what they want to do and see with their children. Or generational thinking sometimes when you have kids.
exactly.
I think this is the last one in here. So an interest-based perspective, not positional perspective. So we're really looking for people to commit to coming in, and while they may be very passionate about the alternative they think that should be selected, we want them to bring their interests. Why do they feel that way? What are the elements of that alternative that make it important to them? Simultaneously having some willingness to listen to the other side of the table who has a very strong opinion about their preferred alternative and why. Again, the why is the important part. Let's have some conversations about the why. And then, so we went through the the scoping comments, and tried to identify some different interests that we want to try to make sure that we have represented on this group. So we'll have a survey or questionnaire and application for participants, and we're going to ask them specifically what are their interests. And again, we may not be able to check all these boxes, or maybe we will be able to check these and 10 more. But the objective really is to at least be thoughtful in making sure that we're trying to check these boxes to increase that diversity across the participants. So the timeline for this, we have a plan now. We have a document that outlines our approach. We're working on the application. We plan to start with, around the release of the scoping report, a 2-week or so recruitment process. And we'll sit down with Enterprise Services, take a look at those applications, identify who is selected, who wasn't selected. We may or may not need to kind of supplement that application process. If we don't get a great response in that initial, we might need to reach out to some select organizations or interest groups specifically. And then we'll, again, notify the selected, not selected. With the first meeting being roughly probably about the time that this group meets again, which I think will be in April. You want to talk about that in a bit, Jesse?
Mayor Selby, did you?
Is there a time, is there like something one of the recruiting before, pushing this out, like I'm going to announce this tomorrow night at council, what's the time commitment?
So we have not identified a specific set of meetings, but probably 3 to 5 meetings between now and the draft AIS release. So again, roughly on the same sequence as your meetings and the same sequencing, same frequency.
So that might be quarterly. Yeah, trying not to, again, best use everyone's time, but make sure that we have the opportunity to have the discussions around key elements where folks of different perspectives really can add value, and make sure that our eyes are open and we're aware of those
Touch points, circles through all the other
Right.
ones.
Exactly.
We'll also need to, once the group is selected, need to work with that group to identify is the best time to meet at noon on Tuesdays or 7 o'clock on Wednesdays. Like, what is that timing, what does it mean for those involved?
How many people you in?
We haven't identified a specific number. We want to keep, we need a group that's manageable. I think less than 20 is what we said in the document.
Is it on the website yet?
There is one paragraph that briefly mentions it, but the actual recruitment process won't start until the scoping report is released. And so there'll be more information added in the next couple of weeks.
And we'll use our email list to notify everyone of the scoping report coming out and this opportunity becoming available.
So so it's not actually starting now?
It is not starting now.
Okay.
Today, yes.
No, February, it'll be in the spring, you say? Or it'll be in like February?
The recruitment will start in February with the
Okay.
first meeting likely being in early spring.
Okay, good.
Could you send these slides to us, particularly the list of the interest groups you're interested in?
That was a good question on Thursday that came up too. Folks from the work groups asked if the slides would be available because it's also a nice synopsis of the comments.
It
And
is.
you know what, we just hadn't thought that through, but it seems to make sense that we can post that to the website as well. So yes, and we're just really with the work groups kind of wanting to preview this with you, give you an update where we're at, and let you know that this is coming. That we're a month away from starting recruiting. So yes,
Jeff?
I'd like to sound a note of caution on doing this. This is an optional activity in the context of doing an EIS. You might even consider it to be a luxury. And in our current state of affairs, where the scope of the EIS is constrained by funding, if any technical analyses that are actually necessary for the EIS are given the short shrift because of this activity, I think that's a problem.
Understood. And I would say that we're working with DES to evaluate budget allocations and how community sounding board or community outreach plays in with that, and what needs to happen to prepare a defensible EIS with all the technical analyses required. So point taken.
So, how long do you perceive each meeting to be? Like 1 hour, 2 hours, 4 hours? Or do you have a feel about
A
that?
couple hours, but we're getting down to the nitty gritty, I think,
Yeah.
soon.
And I think it'll vary by topic also. There'll probably be a number of topics that we can tackle in 2 hours, and there might be something really complex that takes a bit longer.
Okay.
But right now, without this, the general public, other than being able to comment at a meeting like this, really doesn't have
An opportunity.
any input until the draft EIS comes out, right?
That's right.
That's exactly right.
So this is a way to enable interested individuals that are not part of any of these governmental work groups an opportunity to have some kind of input into the process.
That's right, on key
Because
topics.
we haven't done enough of that yet?
Well,
It's a new process.
and I'm not, yeah, we've done a lot of that already, for sure. But again, this would, I mean, I think it's reasonable to do this as long as it's a balanced work group. And that there's actually active participation by the members. I think if, I'd caution going with, I know from our experience with high school level people, kids are busy, they may commit to something like this, but not necessarily show up. So I think I wouldn't necessarily confine myself to youth, depending on how you define that, because it's hard.
We'd be college students.
Yeah,
Right.
yeah.
I think this is an important part of the public outreach, and I appreciate you organizing this.
I think that, Jeff, to your point though, it's well made. We're having to really look at balancing all of our objectives here. Ray Peters also had a voice of caution for us in the funding and governance work group, making sure that we appropriately clearly communicate the goal, and that we manage expectations on what the sounding board is and what it is not. I think that Ray's point, where he said, let's talk about the why, I think is critical. We don't expect people to suddenly shift their preference on an alternative, but if we can figure out some of the why, it's where we might have the opportunity to find common ground. It also is the opportunity to make sure that key elements like discussing and developing the measurable evaluation criteria or mitigation measures, that those folks have a really solid understanding and opportunity to be involved, so that as we advance, they were part of that early first foundational step, and they know how we move forward and how we got where we landed. So, but I hear you both on making sure that it's constructive, that we manage expectations, and that we have budget constraints that we are very well aware of. For what it's worth. But thank you for the input. It is helpful for us. You know, we look to this group for that policy level, your representative constituents' guidance. And so we want to make sure it makes good sense to you too. Thank you.
Yeah, no problem.
Jesse, may I do
Yeah.
the community, the 2019?
Oh, that's a
vision?
perfect. Yeah, that's a good idea.
Okay,
Yeah.
great. So we're just gonna skip over one or switch the sequence so that we can build off of this. As Ray just described, we anticipate that there is good opportunity through the community sounding board to have that working level engagement with a select member of the community. We also recognize that the larger community should or would like to remain involved in the process and understand how we are advancing. What we anticipate for our timeline for the next required or milestone for general community engagement is the draft will be issued in 2020. So as Ray mentioned in the beginning, from today through 2020, that's about a year and a half before there's significant milestone for community engagement. So Enterprise Services is committed to keeping the community involved. We think that for 2019, when we are in our technical analyses, understanding that there's the community sounding board, the opportunities could be just to keep our name, keep us relevant and fresh with the community, and that could be at 2 opportunities this summer. And our thought is that we could use the Capitol Lake Fair and the Festival of the Stachas to do flyering, to allow the community to understand where we're at in the process, to give them information about the project website so they understand where they can find current information. If we have an update on measurable evaluation criteria, that would be a good opportunity for our team members to be discussing that with the community members that are receiving the flyers at that point. That is our approach for 2019, and in 2020, when we are issuing the draft, we'll come back and describe what we think that the best opportunities for outreach are at that point.
May I point out to the members here that if you have a community activity that you feel that perhaps the team should be there to explain, or an opportunity for us to explain what's happening with Capitol Lake, let us know early rather than later, because these things really need to get on the schedule so that we understand what the costs are going to be, and so we can evaluate the event for its effectiveness and for the information event.
I instantly thought of the Thrifty County Fair, because that brings in so many thousands of people from all over the county.
Arbor Days and Spring Arts Walk.
Jeff, is there any tribal events that we should perhaps be attending? By invitation, of course. You can get back to us later on.
Yeah, I think we'll get back to you.
Okay, thank you.
I apologize, I have to take off for another meeting I've got to make. Before I left, but I wanted to kind of put this out there. Are we tracking in kind from the other agencies that are just our staff time? That we're, I know in Olympia, we're devoting quite a bit of staff time. Can that be quantified as some kind of match later on if the ledge comes back and says, we're not going to give any more money, but we're matching. I mean, that's kind of elevating what we're bringing to the table already, and like the sea level rise draft response plan was expensive. That was a joint venture. That should be put in as in kind that's helping this process too. I don't know where that fits, but I know at one point, was it the Senate or the House, or like, what they brought forward in the budget was that there had to be a match
Right.
by the
That's a good idea.
Just thinking like, why start tracking it now? It doesn't.
Yeah, I think you bring up a really, really good point. I know internally, we didn't start tracking this until the budget really became an issue, and this was like a little while ago. And so if you haven't done that already, I would certainly encourage you to do it.
Go back to our managers.
Yeah, find out how much time did you invest in the process, because we have committee members from each of the governments who are
We're cheap.
participating.
I'm talking staff. They're really expensive.
You can chalk us up
Well, I
for
don't
10
make like
cents
as
an
much
hour.
money.
But I think it's good to understand how much of a commitment we have in our staff time, how we have directed our staff to participate in this. And I think there needs to be a realization of, while it may not be considered in kind, I think it's good for for people to understand how much time has been devoted toward problem solving. I think it's always a good thing to understand what it takes to get to a solution.
Well, and I think that it's really, meaningful or significant an accomplishment that all of the local governments, entities at this table had work group members in phase 1. All of the work groups and all of you folks signed the letters to help get funding for the EIS and get into phase 2, saying that you would continue participation, and everyone has followed through and continues to support and provide input into the process, which is pretty great. All right.
Yeah, just to say one quick thing. I know that you were thinking really specifically about getting information out, particularly in Olympia, Thurston County, or Tumwater. And I realize Lacey only indirectly has impacts because of lot for this thing, but there are major festivals and kinds of things, the fun fair, et cetera, that you might think of one or two of those to have handouts at. But just if you have the ability to do that, because it isn't limited to Lacey people on some of those things. Just saying.
That's a good point. All right, so we do want to provide an update. We've referred to this, I know, many times today around agency coordination. In early December, we kind of compiled our list of topics, projects, programs that we knew various agencies and governmental partners that were represented on the technical work group were working on, had in the works, or had just released some type of plan, like sea level rise is a perfect example. And we reached out to our technical work group representatives for all of the agencies, cities, county, port, whatnot, as well as some additional regulatory agencies that we want to connect with and keep up to speed as we move forward on the EIS. And over the last month have scheduled and conducted various calls and meetings with those folks. So I will describe that, but I also just want to say that along with your agenda, we included an updated meeting roster. And the meeting roster was a request in our October meetings that we just provide this on a regular basis. We anticipate continuing to meet with you quarterly in 2019. This allows you just to know what additional meetings are occurring in or beyond the work groups. So it just lists our agency coordination meetings that we've had.
This is 2018.
Yes, 2018. And we'll have a few we'll add in the next few days as well. So we have met with Department of Fish and Wildlife, Department of Natural Resources, met or called, Department of Ecology, Army Corps of Engineers, Department of Archaeology and Historic Preservation. We are meeting with Thurston County today, City of Tumwater tomorrow. We have also met with Lot, the port, am I forgetting?
City of Olympia.
At the City of Olympia. In these meetings or calls, we really used our work group representative as the door, like I mentioned, to that agency, where in advance we said, hey, here's the 4 things we would really love to connect with you on. We think these 4 things could have an access to the EIS. We want to make sure that we are consistent with your program. We understand your milestones. We understand if you have existing data that we should be aware of that adds value to the EIS. And the work group folks were wonderful. So we have had all but 2 of those meetings, and we have been able out of that to really receive additional understanding, but also receive additional input that we are not collecting ourselves or having to do. So for example, traffic counts or LiDAR imagery, things of that nature add a lot of value. And we also make sure that again, as we're starting off in up-to-date understanding the TMDLs, understanding sea level rise and whatnot. As part of that, the other update we wanted to provide is that we now have Lot participating on all 3 work groups, which is wonderful. Thank you. We were with Lori and Lisa on Thursday, and Justin as well, so that was great. We also have DAT participating on the technical work group. That again just helps us to make sure that we are having this resource as we assess historic and cultural resources. And then the Corps is also participating on a topic basis with the technical work group. What this does is that it also makes sure that we are thoughtful in doing everything we can to streamline permitting in phase 3, that we are consistent with what needs to happen. And again, just like in phase 1, we wanted to tee up the next phase to be effective and efficient, we want to tee up phase 3 as much as we can. So we want to... Oh, yeah.
I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Do we have a participation from the tribe on the historical piece of work groups?
Absolutely. We have Scott with us for the technical work group.
Okay.
And that we definitely will be, continuing discussions as we're understanding cultural resources and as we assess that in the EIS.
Okay, thank you.
And then,
And what department are you working with this afternoon, meeting with at the county?
Brad is our point of contact on the technical work group. He said he's grabbed a few staff members that he thought were great when we're talking about, let's see, I made a few notes. The Storm and Surface Water Advisory Board,
Mm-hmm.
and then also watershed planning, existing data.
Thank you.
So I'm not sure who he enticed or convinced to meet with us. Did you want to add something real quick?
Oh, no, I was just pointing out.
I
Oh,
just have
thank you.
one other thing. I don't see DNR being briefed here at all.
We met with DNR as well.
Okay.
And then DNR is represented on both our technical work group and funding and governance.
Perfect, thank you.
And we want to be, smart about state aquatic managed lands. The other update, and Commissioner Zita has been great in kind of helping us understand the port's staffing process as well. So we hope to continue to have Commissioner Zita with us this next year, but the port's new executive director is coming into that position end of this week, right? So the port will be in a position to determine what staff is able to and appropriate for the technical and funding and governance work groups. So we did communicate that to those work groups on Thursday in case they were looking around saying, where's the port? We said, hey, they're coming. So that's our other coordination update.
We'll be at the table.
That sounds perfect.
Yeah.
Anything else? Did I capture that okay?
That's perfect.
Okay.
I hope I'll be here, I might get vote if the president of the commission, which is a rotating position, says, no, I want it. But somebody will be here.
That's awesome. Thank you. And so I mentioned this, but again, just if you see your technical work group folks and you're walking on the hall, just tell them we're singing their praises. They have been wonderful. Everyone has been really great making time for us. And sometimes it really has been a 45-minute call, but that 45-minute call was worth its weight in gold. So thank you for that. That gets us to our upcoming meeting. So we had on our process map anticipated throughout this next year we'd meet with you guys about quarterly. We think that still makes good sense. That's enough time for us to do work between our meetings and bring you substance, but not so far apart that we're not able to get a pulse and give you an update. So we're thinking that probably mid-April is about the right time to meet with you again. I think what we'll do is meet with technical funding and governance and then executive kind of within a few days. We love that order. It lets us touch base with those folks and bring any comments or major issues forward to you as well so that you are up to speed. I think if it works for you guys, I will send out a doodle poll again. That seems to be the most efficient way to track busy people's calendars. I will probably do that this week because I have a better shot of getting all of you available at the same time if I'm a couple months ahead of your calendars. And your executive assistants are wonderful, by the way. Thank goodness. And then what we want to do in April is we will be into the EIS. We will have our pencils to the paper and be working. April will be an important meeting. We might bring snacks to keep you fueled. We want to cover measurable evaluation criteria, the criteria of how we will evaluate and compare alternatives. So I think it'll be a great one, a fun one. Any questions on that? Okay, perfect. Then we somehow have caught ourselves back up. We're only 5 minutes over here. This is our opportunity.
Amazing.
We've done it. This is our opportunity to solicit any feedback and just open discussion. That can be anything you'd like to share. Our meetings, communication between work groups, thoughts that just popped in your mind, feedback for us, just an opportunity to share any thoughts you have.
You guys are doing great.
Thank you.
This is very valuable for me, very valuable, thank you.
Thank you for coming. We appreciate it. We know you have a lot that you've probably got on your plate right now. And also, Deborah, Carrie, if there's anything that comes up later, please email them and it'll get to us as well. Okay, so with Chris.
I would just like to say that I really appreciate Lot being at the table. You bring a lot of value to
Well, I'm really pleased that actually Pete suggested it because we're so impacted by whatever his decisions are made. So I think it's good to be here.
I totally second what Chris said. It was great to have the call with your team, ahead of our work group meetings, and then meeting Lisa and Lori and what data you already have, and kind of understanding that and pulsing that, getting some input from your folks, and then funding of governance has the task ahead of them in parallel to think about that shared funding model and governance. And I think Justin, we're happy to have him and his expertise.
He's great.
Yeah.
Oh, he's a good kid. Yeah, he's smart.
Yeah, I already was like, I like that you're here. Yeah. So we appreciate that in your time.
I'm looking forward to seeing the new logo online,
Yeah.
new name and logo.
That scoping report is when we're going to flip that switch.
Oh, so it won't happen until April?
February.
Oh, February, okay,
Yeah.
good, all right.
Yeah.
It's only a few days away.
All right.
Well, isn't that crazy? Valentine's stuff is everywhere in the stores. My kids' preschool, they're making Valentine's projects. So fast. So this is our opportunity to welcome the public. If there's anyone that would like to share any feedback or comment today. Steve?
I like the new name change for the whole project, especially because it's pretty close to Delhi. But I would also like to suggest that when you refer to a combination system of a lake and an estuary, that you drop the word hybrid and use dual or something else. Because hybrid is sort of a negative connotation as opposed to a purebred. And I just think that calling it a hybrid system doesn't do it justice.
Got it. Yeah, we've used open system to represent anything in which there is that exchange of tidal water to kind of cover that as an umbrella, but I understand what you're saying. Any other comments?
Yeah, not to beat the dead horse, you three have already heard one of my comments. I'm quite concerned about the potential health of juvenile Chinook salmon. Right now, the Capitol Lake is, for lack of a better term, a sanctuary. We have a good number of contaminants currently in Butt Inlet. Should we convert to an open system, those contaminants obviously would end up into the basin of what is now Capitol Lake. The governor's ORCA task force has outlined in some detail the extensive damage, lethality, disease that can occur with juvenile Chinook with these contaminants, which are all persistent hydrocarbons. And ultimately, who loses are not only the fishermen, but our orcas, our southern resident orcas. I don't know that any activity has been undertaken in the last 10 years to study this with this issue, and I'm quite concerned about it. Secondly, I'd like to introduce the concept of sprawl, and I would like to I believe that this is an environmental health issue. I would very much like to see, I don't know if it's possible or not, I'd like to see those who are evaluating the environmental health issue look at such things as how do people value real estate. For example, mudflat estuary property versus lake property. My understanding from the real estate people that I know is there's a considerable difference in evaluation. And people, in my opinion, tend to vote their values with their dollars. The real estate people that I know tell me time and time again that lake real estate is a multiple in dollar value as opposed to estuary value, the mudflat value. So I'll throw that out there. I think that needs to be looked at.
Thank you. Anything else from observers or public?
We have names.
I can stand. My name is Allie Johnson. I'm on the board of the Deschutes Estuary Restoration Team. And I just, want to say thank you for considering hiring at the festival with such as a nice way of engaging public there. And also, just want to be an advocate for including high school students in the community sounding board, especially if this process is going to go over a year or two. I think they would, maybe transition into college students. And I do really think the youth locally are very up to date on the Lake Estuary science behind that. I was just speaking to the Marshall Middle School Citizen Science Institute last week, and those kids, I think, are smarter than me in terms of ecology and biology. So I would also throw out 2 names of contacts for working with Squaxin in terms of cultural resources and archaeological. Rhonda Foster manages the Cultural Resources Department, and Charlie Christ is the Executive Director of the Museum and Research Center, and they're all for the information. And, one more question. Talking about the numerical models for the potential width of the opening for the estuary option, is that something that would be included in the draft EIS and open for public comment? I'm just curious.
Yes, that's correct.
Okay. Okay, that's all. Thanks.
Thank you. Well, thank you for coming today, to observing, listening. There also are forums if you think of anything else. We appreciate it.
Is that your friend?
Yeah, thank you all. Look for a doodle poll, and then we will see you again in April. You also should receive emails notifying you, and I'm sure we'll reach out as well to all the work groups to let you know when the scoping report is issued, and also when we release and put forward the community sounding board application. So we'll keep you up to speed.
Thanks.
Thank you.